Zeus loved the mortal woman Alcmene and came to her in secret, and she conceived a son of the king of the gods. His name would be Heracles, but his life was cursed before it began, for Zeus had sworn a mighty oath. The next child born of his blood would rule over all the rest. He meant it for his son, but Hera, his jealous wife, had heard him, and she had a crueler plan. She held back Alcmene's labor and hurried another child of the blood into the world first, a weak cousin named Eurystheus. By Zeus's unbreakable word, that boy would rule, and Heracles, the greater man, would serve him. At last, Heracles was born, strong and bright, but the shadow of Hera's hatred was already over the cradle. That very night, she sent 2 serpents gliding into his crib. The household woke to screams and found the baby laughing, a crushed serpent in each tiny fist. So it began the hardest life any hero would live. Born to greatness, bound to servitude, hunted by a goddess from his first breath. Yet even in the cradle, his strength had spoken. The suffering would be long, but it would not be the end of him. Heracles grew into the strongest man alive. He freed the city of Thebes, and they hailed him as a champion. For a while, his life was glory. The king gave him his daughter Megara, and Heracles made a home of his own. He had everything a man could want, which was exactly what Hera could not forgive. So she reached into his mind and shattered it. A red madness fell over his eyes, and he could no longer tell his own family from his enemies. What he did in that darkness, he never chose. When the madness lifted, Heracles stood in the wreck of his own home and understood in one unbearable moment what his hands had done. The strongest man alive fell to his knees and wished that he could die. Half blind with grief, he went to Delphi to be cleansed, and the oracle of Apollo gave him his sentence. Serve your cousin Eurystheus, do the labors he commands. Only then will your guilt be washed away. So the famous labors were never a hero's adventure. They were a penance. A broken man, carrying a guilt he never chose, set out to earn his way back to the light. And if he could endure it all, he would become more than a man. Cleansed of his guilt, Heracles came for his first labor. The frightened king commanded him, bring back the skin of the lion of Nemea, a beast no blade or bronze could pierce. He tracked the lion through the hills and loosed his arrows, but they fell from its hide like rain off stone. The beast did not even bleed. He swung his club and drove it back, but no blow could break that hide. The lion fled into a cave with 2 mouths, so he thought where he could not strike. He blocked one mouth of the cave with stone and went in through the other, into the dark. He threw his bare arms around its neck and held. It tore at him, but he would not let go until the unkillable beast went still. No blade could cut the hide, so he skinned the lion with its own claws and wore it as armor no weapon could pierce. He carried it to Mycenae, and the king was so afraid he hid in a jar of bronze. The first labor was done, and the legend had begun. For his second labor, Heracles was sent to the swamp of Lerna to kill the Hydra, a monster of 9 writhing heads, and one of them could never die. He drove it out with burning arrows, and the Hydra reared from the black water, hissing, 9 mouths wide. It coiled around his leg and held. He crushed a head with his club, but where one died, 2 grew back, and Hera sent a great crab to bite his heel. So he crushed it underfoot and fought on. He could not win alone, so he called his nephew Iolaus, and as Heracles struck each head away, Iolaus seared the stump with fire, so none could grow again. At last only the deathless head remained. He cut it off and buried it, still hissing beneath a great rock. Then he dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poison, a venom nothing could survive, his deadliest weapon for every battle to come. Eurystheus refused to count the labor, because Iolaus had helped, but the strongest man alive had learned he could not stand alone. And one day, that same venom would be the death of him. For his third labor, Eurystheus set a stranger task: bring back the Hind of Cerynea alive. It was sacred to the goddess Artemis, golden-horned and swifter than any arrow. He could not simply kill it. To wound Artemis's creature was to court a god's wrath, so he chased it over mountains and rivers, through every season for 1 whole year. At last, by the river laden, the weary hind paused to cross, and Heracles caught it gently in his arms, alive and unharmed. But as he turned for home, Artemis stood in his path, Apollo at her side, furious that a mortal had seized her sacred deer. Heracles knelt. The labor was Eurystheus's command, he said, not his own will. And the goddess, seeing his respect, let him pass, and the hind was carried alive to Mycenae. Not every labor is won by force. Some are won by patience and humility before the gods. On the long road to the Boar of Erymanthus lay the land of the Centaurs, home of wise Chiron, the immortal who had trained Heracles as a boy. But the real danger was never the boar. A centaur named Pholus took him in as a guest, and Heracles asked for wine. The one jar was the centaur's shared treasure, a gift from the god Dionysus. Pholus feared to open it, but he did, and its scent spread across the hills. For wine drives centaurs to madness, and the smell of their broached treasure brought the whole tribe down in a fury, hurling rocks and pine trees. So Heracles drove them back with his Hydra-poisoned arrows. But the wild ones fled to Chiron, and a stray arrow found Heracles' old teacher. Not even Chiron, who could heal any wound, could heal the Hydra's venom. The deathless one begged for death and gave up his immortality to end the pain. Heracles had killed his own teacher, and that was the price of his power. Still grieving, Heracles came at last for the Boar of Erymanthus, a monster that had ravaged the whole countryside. He chased it with shouts, on and on, until he drove the great beast into a deep bank of snow, where it floundered and sank. There he sprang on it and bound it fast, and hauled the living boar up onto his shoulders. He carried it home to Mycenae, and the sight of it so terrified Eurystheus that the king dove into a great bronze jar to hide. The man who commands the hero is too craven even to look at him. For his fifth labor, the king chose the most degrading task he could imagine: clean the stables of King Augeas in a single day. 30 years of filth from 3,000 cattle, meant to break his pride. But Heracles went to Augeas and struck a bargain, 1/10 of all his cattle. If the stables were clean by nightfall, the king laughed and swore to it, certain it could never be done. Heracles never touched a shovel. He tore open both ends of the yard and bent 2 whole rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, to run straight through it. The waters thundered through and swept 30 years of filth away, and by nightfall the stables stood clean, the foulest task on earth, undone by a single day's cleverness. Then Augeas learned it was a labor and refused to pay, and Eurystheus refused to count it, because Heracles had worked for hire, so he was cheated twice over, of his wage and of his credit. Yet the task built to shame him, he had turned into a wonder. For his 6th labor, Heracles came to Lake Stymphalian, where a monstrous flock had gathered, man-eating birds with beaks and feathers of bronze, too many to count. They had massed in a dense marsh wood, where no man could wade and no arrow could find them. For once, strength was useless. The strongest man alive stood at a loss. Then the goddess Athena came to his aid and gave him a great rattle of bronze, forged by the hand of Hephaestus himself. From a high ridge, he shook it, and a harsh, clashing din drove the whole flock screaming into the sky. And as they rose into the open, Heracles shot them down, arrow after arrow. Some he killed, and the rest fled far away, never to return, the enemy he could not reach. A god's gift drove into the open, where his aim could finish it. Even the greatest hero does not win alone. For his 7th labor, Heracles sailed to Crete for a great bull laying the whole island waste. Poseidon had sent it up out of the sea, and a god's bull is no ordinary beast. King Minos had promised this bull to Poseidon, then refused to sacrifice it. The furious god drove the beast mad, the same beast that had sired the Minotaur. Heracles asked King Minos for the beast. Minos said only, "Take it if you can," so he went to face the bull alone. He seized it by the horns and wrestled it down, until the raging bull stood still beneath his hands. Then he carried it living across the sea to lay it at the king's feet. But Eurystheus set the bull loose again, and it wandered north to Marathon, to trouble Greece for years to come. So it went with every labor. Heracles paid the price, and the world kept the reward. Nothing he won was ever for himself. For his eighth labor, Heracles sailed to Thrace for the mares of King Diomedes. The king was a monster. He fed every stranger who came to his door to his man-eating horses. Heracles came with a band of friends. They overpowered the grooms and drove the savage mares down toward the sea. But the Bistones came after them in arms. So he left the mares with his young companion, Abderus, and turned back to face the king. He scattered the Bistones and dragged King Diomedes back alive. But on the shore, the mares had killed his young friend. Heracles raised a city over his grave and gave it Abderus's name. Then he gave the tyrant the only fitting end. He threw Diomedes to his own mares, and the horses that had devoured so many strangers devoured their master. And at last, they were calm. The labor was done, but it had cost him a friend, for the price of his glory always fell on those he loved. For his ninth labor, Heracles sailed to the land of the Amazons, warrior women who feared no man. Their queen, Hippolyta, wore a war belt given by the god Ares, and the daughter of King Eurystheus demanded it. Hippolyta herself came to meet him and asked why he had come. He told her the truth. His labor was to bring her belt to the king's daughter, and the queen, admiring his honesty, promised it freely, with no blood spilled. The hardest labor yet looked already won, but Hera could not allow it. Disguised as an Amazon, she spread a lie through the ranks. The stranger is carrying off your queen, and the Amazons snatched up their arms. Seeing them charge, Heracles believed the queen had betrayed him. In the fury of the fight, he struck her down and took the belt she had freely promised. He won the belt for the king's daughter, but only by killing an ally who had meant him no harm. A single lie from a goddess had turned a friend into an enemy, and a victory into a wound. Not every scar he carried was on his body. For his 10th labor, Heracles set out for the far west, for the cattle of three-bodied Geryon. Where the land ran out, he split a mountain in two and raised the pillars of Heracles that still mark the edge of the world. The sun blazed so fierce he could go no further, so he drew his bow and aimed an arrow at the sun itself. Helios, the sun god, laughed at his daring and lent him the golden cup that carries the sun home each night. He sailed across the ocean in the cup of the sun to the red island of Erythea. There the two-headed hound Orthrus charged him, and one blow of his club laid it dead. Geryon's herdsman fell next. Then Geryon himself came on, 3 warriors in one body, 3 shields, 3 spears, but a single poisoned arrow found all 3 hearts, and the giant crashed down. He drove the cattle into the cup and sailed them home. No mortal had ever reached the world's edge and returned, and his name now marked the boundary of the earth. 10 labors were done, and Heracles believed himself free at last. But the king would not count 2 of them, the Hydra and the stables, so the coward demanded 2 labors more. For the first of those 2 added labors, Heracles sought the golden apples of the Hesperides, immortal fruit, guarded by a dragon that never slept. On the way, he came to the Caucasus, where the Titan Prometheus hung chained, an eagle tearing at him each day for giving fire to mankind. Heracles shot the eagle and broke the Titan's chains. In thanks, Prometheus gave him a secret. Do not pick the apples yourself. Send Atlas whose own daughters guard them, and offer to bear his burden while he goes. So he came to Atlas, who holds the heavens on his shoulders. "I will carry the sky," he said, "if you will fetch me 3 apples." And Atlas, glad to be rid of his weight, agreed. Atlas brought the apples, but he would not take the sky back. Heracles pretended to agree. "Hold it one moment," he said, "while I pad my aching shoulders." The Titan set down the apples and took back the sky, and once it lay on his shoulders, he could never let go. Heracles picked up the apples and walked away. He had freed one Titan and outwitted another. The strongest man alive had become the cleverest too. One labor remained. The worst of all, his 12th and final labor, Eurystheus set the impossible: go down into the land of the dead and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound that guards the gates of hell. First he was cleansed in the holy mysteries. Then he went down through the dark, where no living man may walk. The shades of the dead fled before him, but Heracles strode on. In that gloom he found Theseus of Athens, the hero who slew the Minotaur, trapped in a chair of stone for helping a friend court the queen of the dead. Heracles tore him free, for even in the kingdom of death, heroes do not abandon heroes. He came before Hades himself and asked for the hound. The Lord of the Dead allowed it, but on one condition: master Cerberus with your bare hands and use no weapon. So he seized the beast by its 3 throats, and though it tore at him, he would not let go, until the hound of hell went still in his grip. Then he carried it up into the light. He showed the beast to Eurystheus, who dove into his bronze jar one last time. Then he carried Cerberus back to the dark where it belonged. 12 labors done, he had walked into death itself and walked back out. The penance was over, but his story was not. His labors done, Heracles took a wife, the gentle Deianira. At a flooded river, the centaur Nessus offered to carry her across, and Heracles let him. But midstream, Nessus tried to assault her, so Heracles loosed a single arrow across the water and brought the centaur down. As he died, Nessus gave Deianira a parting gift, his own blood. "Keep it," he told her. "If your husband's love should ever fade, soak a robe in this, and he will love only you again." She believed him and hid it away for years. At last she feared another woman held his heart, so she soaked a great robe in the blood and sent it to him as a gift of love. Heracles put it on, and it began to burn. For this had been Nessus's revenge all along. Heracles' own arrow had steeped the centaur's blood in the Hydra's venom, and the love charm was deadly poison. No strength on earth could tear the burning robe away. It was killing the man that nothing could kill. And Deianira, learning what she had done, took her own life in grief. The hero who survived every monster was undone by love and his own past. The Hydra he slew long ago had killed him at the last, burning alive in the robe. Beyond all cure, Heracles climbed Mount Oeta and built himself a great pyre. He laid himself upon it and asked to be set alight. No one could bear to light it. At last, a passing shepherd did him that mercy, and Heracles gave him his great bow in thanks. The flames rose and took the suffering mortal, but the fire could burn away only what was mortal in him. The part that was his father's, the part that was Zeus, could not die. And so Zeus swept his son up from the flames and carried him to Olympus, to live among the gods forever. There even Hera let her hatred go at last, and gave him her own daughter, Hebe, goddess of youth, to be his bride. The mortal, who suffered everything a life could hold, had become a god. This was always the meaning of his labors. Endure, and you will rise. This was the story of Heracles, the man who became a god. When Heracles rose to Olympus, King Eurystheus felt safe at last. The man who spent a lifetime hiding in a jar now turned his spite on the hero's children. The sons and daughters of Heracles fled across Greece, and only Athens dared to shelter them. Eurystheus demanded their surrender, and Athens answered with war. In the battle, the king's 5 sons fell one by one, and the old coward turned his chariot and fled. But Hyllus, eldest son of Heracles, ran the chariot down, and by the cliffs of the Ceryneian rocks, he slew him. He carried the king's head home to Alcmaeon, the hero's aged mother, who had waited a lifetime to see justice done. So the tyrant outlived the hero, but not the hero's blood. The children of Heracles lived on until their line wore crowns across Greece. Justice may come late, but it comes.